Well, you know, Edward Conley called me one day, long after the last story. And he said, you know, I'd like to try another challenge. So the whole company said, why don't we try to give to the people the new experience of the new Alone in the Dark? That's how everything started. When you build a game like Alone in the Dark, what you want to do is to make people feel that they're in a different world. You want to send them in very strange realms, at the limit of reality. So 4 teams gave 4 different touch to the same idea of how do I make this very bizarre, very strange world real.
Alone started with a meeting between us at Darkworks, a minor production studio, and the large-scale publisher Infogrames. They gave us 3 months to convince them whether we were capable of updating the series. We worked on the scenario, technology, visuals, and character design, and what we did convince them, so we made a start on pre-production for real.
So,
this 4th Alone in the Dark is an unusual project because it's a sequel arriving after a certain time lapse. So even though we knew the series well, we had to immerse ourselves in it. We had to consider the issues from all angles and pick up on what Infogram called the fundamentals of Alone.
They'll be on Shadow Island in about an hour.
iMotion is the label, which is basically a publisher that is responsible for producing the title. And so our role has been to help at the beginning Darkworks to form themselves, to structure themselves, also to especially give direction on what is Alone in the Dark.
I must have those tablets in their translation. Is that clear, Johnson?
Perfectly, sir.
In order to give Infogrames, the publisher, the most complete possible picture of the scenario, I wrote a small novel of about 150 pages in about 1 month. At the start of the story, there's still the emblematic character of the earlier series, Lord Carnby, even if he's been retouched and revised a bit, and there's now another main character, Aline Cedric. Both of them are sent to a lost island off the coast of Maine by the same agent to retrieve some Native American stone tablets.
I don't think you have any idea of the dangers awaiting us below.
Dangers? What could possibly be dangerous?
We tried to reconstruct the same mood as in the first Alone with its fairly marked Lovecraft influence. The well-known problem with Lovecraft, though, is that every time he describes something, he says that it can't be described or that it's invisible, which is fairly hard to make work visually. So, what we've done is stay in line with his novels, where he imagines a world close to our own real one that represents a great danger to it.
So we defined 3 or 4 types of atmosphere, with a manner, a dramatic helicopter arrival, underground passageways, that sort of thing. In 3 or 4 images, therefore, we developed the setting we wanted, something fairly distinctive. It was important to provide a fair amount of exterior environments to bring an epic dimension to the adventure.
Almost immediately, the idea of the opposition between darkness and light emerged. This idea has been integrated in the scenario, in the visual atmosphere, and indirectly in the ambient sounds. And it was also there in our choice of technology, and we've perfected fairly precise tools to be able to produce real-time lighting on fixed backgrounds.
The ideas get brushed up and polished off, of course. To begin with, our direction was fairly unclear, but as we went along, it got more defined until we hit on something that wasn't a compromise, because compromise should be avoided at all costs. It was something that could express our original intentions and those concerning the writing.
It was kind of like Lovecraft, very dark, atmospherically.
There's an end of the 19th century feel to it, focusing on that classical Boston architecture. This way we could play on a particular element in relation to the Alone in the Dark series. That element was contrast. We were creating an island, a closed world, very dark, very evil, which had evolved according to the rules of the historical period. The characters come from an age that has moved on by 1.5 centuries, so this time lag comes out visually and in the technology. It is also expressed dramatically, and this was appealing. This was the thing we concentrated on most at the start.
In pre-production and production, we came up with hundreds of decors, most of which were in black and white, so we mainly concentrated on the atmosphere and on composition, even though the outlines weren't great. We knew we had a team of highly competent computer graphic artists who could create continuity in the graphics from one scene to the next.
It's true that we hadn't planned such an amount of work to do. I had some experience in animation, but there's something very specific to video games, which is that nothing can be masked. You have to be able to turn through 360 degrees in every decor. The same goes for characters. Nothing can be hidden or masked, so everything, absolutely everything has to be designed. Characters, decors, and creatures from every angle to be able to turn right around them. Camouflage is totally out.
There's Mark, an illustrator who's probably more of a painter. He knocked together a number of illustrations actually in oil paints. The pictures explain the game's story. You have to be able to situate certain characters and personalities you come across in the game. There are a number of puzzles that are also linked to the paintings.
Video game characters have to be fairly complex and human enough so that empathy is possible. You should really be able to identify with the character. We needed a fairly strong masculine character with long hair who has seen the world a bit, etc., and who is theoretically possible to identify yourself as much as possible. Then we needed an extremely attractive female character with a plain touch, but not only because of her university education, but also her contact with other people there, but also to make her different, create an interesting synergy between the characters. On the island in question, where all the scary action takes place, there are several types of character. Some of them are evil humans, the ones directing and organizing the threat. Then there are the creatures. A colleague, Claire Wendling, had the job of designing the dozen or so monsters. From her models we made sculptures, which was also an interesting innovation for Darkworks. All the characters were entirely sculpted prior to modelization and rendering. The really worthwhile aspect was that we were able to link the drawings to their 3D results, which saved really a lot of time. Much of what makes up a character is the way it moves. This is also true for the monsters. We talked a great deal about how important this was with Claire. There are the massive monsters that are going to move about slowly, generating a type of fear that is not the same as the more nervous monsters who are going to speed about. The effect will be totally different. That was a lot of work, and it was possible to work through what we wanted in conjunction with the animators. This was where it was useful being a smaller studio. This relation wouldn't have been possible in a very vast structure.
When you start out with Oline's character, you don't have a weapon, so there's an important panic factor. You've got to run, and get away. This sets up a totally different system of gameplay to that of Edward, who starts out the game with his traditional revolver. Today's figure of modern heroism is the couple. It started with the Avengers, it's there in the X-Files, and in a whole load of Hollywood films. The couple today is the modern hero.
We decided early on that we weren't going to allow the player to change character in the middle of the game to give the possibility to get totally immersed in the hero.
What's more is the two characters are in almost permanent radio contact, which means that as a player I can choose at any moment to call up the other character. It's kind of an online help for the player if he gets stuck at any point. It also helps build a relationship between the two characters, and that's something great.
I can see you now.
There's a real-time dimension to the adventure here, which adds to its pressure and tension. This radio function means that you can send panic messages and also hear the other character's grief.
Harvey, answer me.
Aline, I thought you were dead.
The technology deals with the light and darkness opposition principle. We essentially have a real-time lighting on fixed backgrounds, and this lighting perfectly embraces the contours of the decor. This is where the technology is remarkable. This is effective in combat gameplay because some monsters get afraid or excited by flashlight. It's helpful in gameplay in general because certain objects that the player has to find sparkle in the beam of the flashlight. We built the gameplay up around this idea.
It seemed obvious that to create an atmosphere like that, we would need something industrial, a mix between Gothic and industrial.
We wanted to make the music interactive. Something that people have come close to in games like Silent Hill, for example. We wanted to take the idea to its limits and say that the music should live at the same time as the player.
As it was for consoles, we based the sound solely on synthesis. We recorded a lot of percussion instruments that we totally reworked, and industrial sounds. Factory and motor noise, that kind of thing.
You hear that sort of bang, bang, bang sound like someone banging on a dustbin. A kind of bang, bang, bang. The player hears that and freaks out. But if you step backwards, you don't hear it anymore. The music's been scripted. If the character heads forward, there's a crescendo until he meets the boss.
We've added some sounds to Alone that are much more Gothic, like voices and stuff, to layer the sound as thick as possible.
When you hear those banging noises, everybody gets freaked, even at infograms, so obviously it works.
To begin with, people would look at us in a strange way, but when they realized that it went very well with the action, people changed their minds, and now they say it's just the right music that was needed.
As far as sound effects were concerned, we made a great effort to build up our own sound bank. It would have been easy for us to root around in pre-existing sound banks, to dig up sound left, right and center and say, hey, no sweat, but I'll just stay right here in my office. And there we actually made all the sounds. There are more than 600 sounds now in Alone in the Dark. We took it to the point of obsession, recording sounds in forest at night in the middle of November, for example. It gave it a very Blair Witch Project feel.
All the resources are ready. When we integrate them, we'll really be able to say we've got a game. As it's a continuous adventure, there's about 8 to 10 hours playing time for each character. This means it has to work as a whole, and an event that happens at the beginning of the game can have consequences on the end of the game. That's what traditional scenario writing is all about. You ask the questions, you set the problems, and so then you have to provide answers. The distance between the question and its answer is primordial, because if you forget the question when you reach the answer, then there's a hitch. There's an enormous amount of links between the different parts of the game, so the tuning has to be fine, very fine. We don't have difficulty settings like there can be in some games, like beginner, easy, nightmare, etc. There's a system that enables adapting the difficulty of the game to the player's performance. This means that you can find more or less ammunition or first aid kits to repair any wounds according to your performance. To build up the enemy creatures, we worked on all the ways we didn't want to die, and we looked for the creatures that might cause these deaths.
To try out the ideas, we got together a team that only worked on fear in the game and how to generate it. We called them the Fear Team. We'd get someone testing something saying, hey, there's some bug in there somewhere. The guy would go off to test the little sequence in all innocence, and then a couple of times he ends up falling off his chair because a dog jumps out at him.
lot of people have been following throughout the whole process, the whole game. Evidently, it took a bit of time. This is a project that's 2 years and a half and nearly 3. Globally, it has an impact on budget, and the budget is around 6 million euros. We've been communicating so far on the PlayStation 1 only, but yes, there's some other consoles that are being developed, and very, very soon I think the audience will discover that we have worked in the last 2 years on the Dreamcast, PC, and PlayStation 2. They're coming. They will be released at about the same period, and PlayStation 2 is for Christmas.
For such a big product like Alone in the Dark, the first thing we need to make is create the hype. In order to make this, we've started communicating on the internet, creating the official website and giving information to the fan community in order to create word of mouth. The second thing, when you come to release date, is using all the media like TV, cinema, print advertising, outdoor, direct mail to make a big marketing campaign.
Alone in the dark, can you see beyond your fear?
We're gonna spend 2 million euros in Europe and probably the same amount in the USA. So that means that we're gonna spend like 5 million euros worldwide. For the release of the game, we're gonna have a lot of merchandising available, but our final objective is to explore the world of licensing, and we're gonna have a comic book ready for the release of the game. And why not a movie?
The controls are dead! What's that on? We have to jump!
So Alone in the Dark is about being natural in a surprising and not natural world. They're just people like you and me. They want to understand what is not understandable.